So the next question that arises is the idea of these populations separating. Okay, they've separated, so what stops them from coming back together? The thing that stops them from coming back together is known as a reproductive isolating mechanism, the RIMS. For the remainder of this lesson, because I've talked for quite a while now, the PowerPoint and the links do a really good job. There's not really much I need to elaborate upon. Okay, so at this point, for the most part, you can just go. I'm just going to kind of follow the PowerPoint through. So these RIMS, they come in a variety of types. One is known as pre-zygotic and the other one is post-zygotic. The zygote forms when the sperm fertilizes the egg, you end up with a zygote. And that zygote will undergo mitosis and produce 2 cells and 4 cells and so on. So there's certain reproductive isolating mechanisms that happen before the zygote forms, and there's certain ones that happen after the zygote forms. We call this pre- and post-zygotic. So our pre-zygotic RIMS, there's a list. You'll see that on the worksheet I've asked you to identify the pre-zygotic and post-zygotic for the nice to know, or be even more detailed with the specific pre-zygotic and specific post-zygotic. So in pre-zygotic, take a look at these 2 squirrels here. The eastern spotted skunk and squirrels. The eastern spotted skunk and the western spotted skunk. If you look at them, in the diagram I've given you, you probably can, I can see a difference. This one has got, smaller white bands and whatnot. But it just happens with the picture I've given you. For most people, unless you're an expert and you can pick up the squirrel, you can't tell the difference between an eastern spotted skunk and a western spotted skunk. And they also smell the same. The difference with these is that they reproduce at different times. One reproduces in, let's say, late winter, and the other one reproduces in early spring. So at different times of the year. So they are temporally isolated. And so if you put them together, they wouldn't interbreed naturally because they reproduce at different times of the year. Another type of separation is ecological separation. And this actually takes into a number of different behaviors. So it could be either ecological or behavioral separation. The bowerbirds are really interesting. The satin bowerbird decorates its nest with blue. McGregor's bowerbird decorates its nest with black. They make these elaborate nests, the males, and then once it's finished the nest, it goes and tries to woo a female. You saw a video of a bowerbird earlier doing its whole little dance thing, and this is representative of an ecological or behavioral separation. This also includes doing certain mating rituals, dances, courtship, and those sorts of things. Then there's mechanical separation. So here's a damselfly. Damselfly is it's an animal, and the male damselfly and the female damselfly of certain species have very specific sexual structures. So here's the sexual structure of one type of species of damselfly. Here's the sexual structure of a different species of damselfly. They're very different. This is not going to fit the same place that this fits. These represent a mechanical separation. So you have to be able to fit in order to produce, or at least have the fertilization event, if it's internal especially. Okay. With the ecological separation, one of the websites that I didn't show you at the beginning, and I'll show you now because it's a little bit more relevant, was this website here. And they do an excellent job of kind of separating the concepts as we learned them in the course. We've talked about many of these already, but now we're under speciation. So I've taken this next series of slides from this site and I've just put them into a slide format. And this is a good place just to make sure that you have a good understanding of the material. So ecological separation, the next few slides, it just steps you through what an ecological separation event might look like. So just work your way through it. You'll see a papaya, you see banana, you see flies. They're mating on their different bananas and papayas and eventually end up with an ecological separation and a brand new species. Post-zygotic RIMS, notice there's 4 of these as well. So this occurs once the fertilized egg has happened. So now we've got the zygote. So there's different things that can happen here. The first one is zygote mortality. So when the egg fertilizes the sperm, it immediately dies. It doesn't have the right proteins, it doesn't have the right messages between the two, and it fertilized and it died immediately. Another one that can happen is where you have an inviable hybrid. So there might be a little bit of development. It might be born, but The hybrid that's born is extremely weak or sickly. It doesn't live very long. So when you look at certain species of frogs that look very similar, they might interbreed, but then their tadpole, if you look at it, is all deformed and it's inviable and it dies almost immediately. Then we get to hybrid sterility. So at the beginning of the class, I used the mule as a classic example when I was trying to prove that certain things were living or not living. And the mule, if you want to get a mule, you get it from a horse and a donkey, not another mule. The mule itself is sterile. So the mule is a result from two very closely related organisms producing an offspring. And so sometimes you'll get a viable offspring. As a matter of fact, the mule is vigorous, it's very strong, and it does what it does very well, but it cannot produce its own babies. It's sterile. And so that's another breakdown in the speciation event. Ligers and tigons, you might have seen pictures of those as well. I don't know if it's on that Tiger Netflix show. They might have talked about that on there. I haven't watched it. I don't know. And then sometimes what will happen is the one species and another will breed, and they'll produce a offspring, and those offspring can interbreed and produce more offspring and so on. And it's typically maybe on the great-grandchildren or the great-great-grandchildren where you'll get breakdown. And so as the generations proceed, you get a breakdown in the hybrids that's often seen in plants and sometimes seen in small little invertebrates like these copepods. Okay. You'll see a worksheet that relates to that. In the Learn 360, I've given you, remember how to get to that. You log in through BYOD. It's probably one of the easier ways. Or if you already logged in and did it in the first week, one of these worksheets, I can't remember if I gave one to you, then you know how to access them already. But I encourage you to work through this. And when you work through it, take a screenshot of the last page, which I've got here, and then put it into your worksheet so that I can see that you've completed it. Okay? But you'll notice I put one as a yellow and one as a pink. So this is the nice to complete or the fully complete. Those worksheets are excellent though. They do a really good job of explaining and giving you an opportunity to demonstrate your learning. Once we finish with speciation, then we have a number of other evolutionary concepts. So these ones here I'm going to spend very little time on. I'm going to let the PowerPoint and the links explain them to you. So I'm just going to explain the main concept and then the activity that's associated with it. When we look at evolution, there are many schools of thoughts. And one of the areas of schools of thought is this idea of Darwin's gradualism versus Eldridge and Gould's punctuated equilibrium. In gradualism, we see a lot of evidence that an organism changes gradually over time. So this butterfly, it might, over a long period of time, lose its coloration. So it goes from this color stripe to less of a stripe to even less to completely white. And so that is known as gradualism. But the problem with gradualism is there's not a lot of fossil evidence to demonstrate it. We're seeing more and more and more of it, so we're getting more and more proof. But a lot of scientists, when they're looking at this, they're saying, you know what, we're looking at the evidence, we see that it's an organism, and over a long period of time, there's no change, and suddenly there is a change. We don't see all these transitional species. And so another pair of scientists, Eldridge and Gould, they propose this thing called punctuated equilibrium, where the organism stays the same for a long period of time, and then there's a very short period of time of drastic change. So it went from this to white. There's a mutation or something that happened, and now it's white, and the white continues, and then it's black, and the black continues. And the normal one, it might continue as well. So there is evidence for both. These are two schools of thought, and on the worksheet, you'll see that I've given you a graphic here, and I'm asking you to identify which one's gradualism and which one is punctuated equilibrium. Okay. Divergent evolution you explored when you did evidence for evolution, and we saw that various organisms have the same bone structure, let's say. So when you look at the human arm, the dog arm, the bird arm, the whale arm, we all have the same bones. But because of the niche that we've decided to inhabit, those bones and those structures have different functions. With convergent evolution, this is where you have the same function but different structures that allow that to occur. So when you look at the bat wing and the bird wing and the butterfly wing, these are all enable the organism to fly, but the evolutionary structures to get there are completely different. So convergent evolution is very interesting. It's a concept you should understand. It's where you end up with similar structures from different evolutionary pathways. So if you want to eat an ant, you want to have a good hide, you want to have a long sticky tongue, you want to have some kind of hands, feet that with claws that allow you to dig through the ground, and those features are perfect to eat ants and termites. And so when you look around the world, you'll see there's a number of different animals that look very similar, have very similar body plans, but they have completely different evolutionary pathways. Yes, based on our biological evolution that we're relying on in this class, there's one single ancestor, but the ancestors for these four are so distant that it is not, that we consider it convergent, that they're not common ancestors, if that makes sense. Okay, so I'm encouraging you in the document on the worksheet that you're going to look at these examples I've given you, and then give me another example of an animal that has convergent evolution that's similar to the pangolin, to the mole, to the phalanger. And this is where I'm going to show you Thor as a legless lizard, and I'm going to show you Hydra or Milkshake as a snake. And the two of them, yes, they're reptiles, so they do have a common ancestor, but they have convergent evolution because lizards have legs and they run around, but this legless lizard doesn't. So they have similar body structures that allow them to inhabit the same niche. Coevolution. Coevolution is another concept. Okay, so the idea that some organisms rely on other organisms in order to be successful. So here are some examples on the screen here. Flowers rely on honeybees for pollination. Without the honeybees to pollinate, they cannot reproduce. Ants, some of them rely on aphids. They've released this sticky sap that makes them, they get a lot of energy from that sap, and they farm the aphids. The acacia plant relies on ants to protect it. There are many examples of coevolution, and some of them we might explore later in the course. In our 3-hour window, we probably won't, sadly. So I encourage you to look at some of the site links I've given here. This is a very wordy slide. It's just to give you more information. And when we look at coevolution, you'll see that I have a worksheet associated with it. And in that worksheet, I'm asking you to know that there's a number of different coevolutionary strategies. Predator and prey, so rabbit and a fox. Competitive species that are competing for the same resource might cause a symbiosis to occur. And mutualistic species that rely on each other to survive. So I'm asking you to look at some of the links, look at the rest of the PowerPoint. For those of you who are trying to do more than nice to know, I've given you this website. It's an excellent one. I'd do it with the class if we were all together. We'd watch this little video and then we'd get a better understanding of this coevolutionary strategy between 4 different organisms. The leafcutter ant is really an amazing organism. So explore that. And if you want to know even more, then you can also explore the coral reefs as well. Right? You can see what the coral reefs is all about. Right? You can see all this stuff. That's pretty cool. Right? And that brings us to the end of this lesson. At the very end, I would suggest for those of you who did the lizard lab, even if you didn't do the lizard lab, you didn't have a chance to do last week, maybe go back and do module 1 and module 3. And then this week, module 4 with the lizards, the do labs, it explains how the whole speciation event occurs. And they do a really good job of integrating the concepts into a simulation and a worksheet. Okay, so that is the lesson. And I know it's a lot of information. We're kind of compacting it down. Remember when you guys go through the worksheet that you have the choice of what you want to work on. So if I come back here to the beginning, remember the green is the minimum. So after you've listened to me talk for an hour, if you did the green at the same time, you'll be done in 3 hours easy. The yellow, it takes a little bit more time, but it fills in those gaps. Okay, so you complete that, then you have probably a complete learning. It'll set you up for moving forward in this concept for grade 12 and in university. And the pink is the stuff for those of you who are really interested. You're kind of sitting around, what am I going to do today? I think I'm going to do biology. And then you can go to the pink and you can do the pink activities, and they will allow you to demonstrate even better understanding, or at least develop better knowledge so that you can demonstrate it on here. I put the lizard lab in pink. I want to do in yellow, but in the interest of time, I did decrease it. But it really is, I would encourage you to look at the lizard lab. At the very end of this document, you're going to see this worksheet. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages long. Only do that for those of you who, I said, live and breathe biology, and you just want to do work. Then this is an interesting exercise that explores these group of elephants, a population of elephants that have become tuskless. And this has been driven by poaching. Poaching is looking for elephants with big giant tusks and even smaller tusks, as they don't find those older elephants any longer with those big tusks. And the elephants that don't have tusks, they were more successful and able to pass their genes. And so this is actually looking at the evolution of the elephants that have tusks and don't. So you might find that an interesting exercise, but only do that as a very, very, very last thing. Okay, so I'm done talking, and we will have activities throughout the week. Remember, Tuesday I'll have the question of the week. It's an engaged piece. Wednesdays will be Wild Wednesdays. I really should focus on Thor and Hydra and Milkshake because that ties in really nicely with this lesson. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, though. Thursday will be some kind of activity. Last week was the flip grid. The week before was a short week. I think we did the Padlet. So this week will be something new. I'm not sure what yet. And then Friday will be the product. The product is due. Okay.